gaining
I don't want to get malnourished either.
Do you look like you're malnourished? You're overeating, and whatever you're overeating, you're throwing up.
I'm done with this conversation. Go to her.
No, we're gonna finish with you.
No, we're not finishing with me. You're making me mad.
You sit down right there. You sit down right over there.
No. There's only been a couple instances. It ain't like I hit her every day, but...
We'll eat everything here, either today or by tomorrow. And I know doing this is killing us.
You okay, baby?
When you look at this couple, what do you think? Probably a couple trying to fight through the odds of their relationship, which in this case is being extremely obese. It's crazy, while that would be what's in your head right now, it's not entirely the case. In fact, these two at the point of this video are no longer together. And why is that? Well, both of them should have been focusing on having the cleanest plates, making friends with the treadmill, and making the scale panic once and for all. Someone in this very weighty relationship cheated. Crazy lore, obviously. But here's the thing, the cheating is genuinely not even the most interesting part of this story, not even close. Because what happened in this relationship of over 11 years across these two people whose combined weight at their heaviest was sitting just under 1,300 pounds goes far beyond who was sleeping with whom. By the time you get to the cheating accusation, it almost feels like a footnote. The people we're looking at in today's video are Lee Sutton and Rena Kiser.
Already barely functioning as it is. And it's just a matter of time before it's too late.
A couple featured on season 4 of the popular weight loss reality show My 600-Pound Life. And if you've never seen the show, the premise is exactly what it sounds like. Dr. Una Nazardin, known everywhere on the internet simply as Dr. Now, takes patients who have reached weights that are actively killing them, puts them on a strict diet, and works them toward bariatric surgery that gives them a real shot at survival.
Okay, now, if you really put the math together, you have eaten the food that belonged for the next 4 years ahead of time.
It's genuinely one of the more compelling things on TV because the stakes are actually human lives, and Dr. Now has absolutely no interest in softening that reality for anyone sitting across from him.
Taxi like I did. I'm very dizzy, and I think I'm having a heart attack.
You don't look like you are.
The show has given us a lot of couples over the years. People who came in together, fought together, lost weight together, and came out the other side looking like different humans. That arc is genuinely moving when it worked.
Even doing the smallest thing is a painful experience.
However, Lee and Rena did not give us that arc. What they gave us instead was something that My 600-Pound Life has never quite known how to handle. Here in this relationship, emotional manipulation became a constant presence because for some reason Lee thought it was cool to be mean to the woman who essentially acted as his hands and legs throughout his entire journey. He would romantically talk over her, cutting her off whenever she tried to express how hurt she had been by his treatment of her.
I don't know what kind of person she wants me to be.
I want you to communicate with me.
I will conversate with you.
I want you to...
If you don't turn around and tell me I'm not paying attention.
Already, that was a big red flag. But it seems Rena had to feign colorblindness just because she was in love. Not until things started moving from emotional to physical, because being an emotionally unintelligent person was not enough. Lee started laying his heavy hands on Rena. Okay, to put that in a more serious frame, Lee started physically abusing Rena. However, those behaviors weren't just reserved for Rena. His ugly tentacles extended to Dr. Now as well, the only person actively trying to help him avoid cutting his life short. On one occasion, Lee even disrespected Dr. Now by walking out on him.
So you have to deal with what is driving you to eat. That's the hard part, and you don't want to do it. And you're running from it and self-destructing.
I'm done with this conversation. Go to her.
And when he doesn't have the strength in his legs to walk out, he just grumbles and mumbles about the smallest things. At some point, you start to ask yourself, does this guy even want this? Why is he even here? But even worse, Lee and Rena's relationship is one where one person was doing everything and the other person was taking everything, all packaged inside the show's standard weight loss format and aired with dramatic string music. Rena spent over a decade keeping this man alive, delayed her own surgery when he needed her, absorbed his accusations, absorbed his hands, things, and still somehow came out the other side of it all healthier and freer than when she walked in. But the story doesn't end neatly there, because the man who received all of that 11 years of someone else's sacrifice poured directly into his survival did lose weight, did find his footing for a while, and then revealed something else underneath it. He ended up becoming one of the more toxic presences the show has ever captured.
I'm shaking really bad. And when I try and take a shower, it's pretty much a full day job because it just wears me out.
The clinic had a rule about patients not getting into relationships with each other, which when you stop and think about it for more than 3 seconds is a pretty reasonable rule. Because if you put two people with severe food addiction in the same place, let them bond over the struggles only they fully understand, and then leave them alone long enough, you're not necessarily creating a recovery story. Sometimes you're creating a support system for staying exactly where they are. Lee and Rena looked at that rule and immediately became one of the reasons it existed. And for the next 11 years, that decision kept unfolding in exactly the direction the clinic had worried it might. Not all at once, just little things stacking on top of other little things, year after year, until the numbers started telling the story for them. By the time my 600-pound life found them, their combined weight was brushing up against 1,300 pounds. Everyday tasks had become serious, time-consuming projects, and somewhere along the way, Rena had quietly rebuilt her entire life around helping Lee function.
The way that we are able to get grocery shopping done is to work together as a team.
Now, if there was one place where the reality of their situation became impossible to ignore, it was the grocery store. Because the second they arrived, it was already obvious this wasn't going to be a grab a few things and leave situation. Even getting through the front doors took a whole lot of work. Both mobility scooters had to be loaded onto a trailer, hauled across town, unloaded, and set up before either of them could start shopping. And just so you understand, that wasn't even the difficult part of the trip. That was the preparation for the difficult part. All of that happened before a single item went into a cart. And for Rena, this wasn't some occasional inconvenience. This was life. Notice how she was even helping Lee get his scooter out while she was on one herself. This is to show you how she'd been managing these routines for years while also carrying most of the practical responsibilities in the relationship. But for some reason, she said this.
Because neither one of us would be able to do it by ourselves.
Making it look like she was getting help from Lee. The whole time, it was just her carrying most of the heavy load. So when she talked about pulling into the parking lot, she wasn't talking about grocery shopping. She was talking about the feeling that came with it, the stares, the attention, that awareness that people notice you before you've even made it through the doors. She described it as feeling like a walk of shame. And watching the footage, it's easy to understand why.
But once we're inside, the anxiety of being in public starts to sink in because
It's like going through the walk of shame.
Because people stared. Of course they stared.
I feel judged by the outside world because I'm different. They're not used to seeing somebody of my size. It's like driving down the highway and seeing a train wreck.
But for two people trying to fix a problem, it looked like they came to the store with one goal, to stack a few more on top of it. Because here's what they bought: chips, soda, multiple liters, bacon, multiple packs, mayonnaise, more soda, and then in case the point hadn't fully landed yet, more food. And even worse, Lee just had to say this.
When I start to shop, I'm so hungry. Once I get home, I know I'm just going to eat everything.
By the time they reached the checkout, what they had assembled looked more like a catering order for an event that nobody had been invited to.
we'll eat everything here, either today or by tomorrow. And I know doing this is killing us.
But then on the way back, something happened that felt almost on brand for the entire situation. The car started acting up and eventually broke down right there on the road. And at that point, nothing about it really felt shocking anymore. Because instead of fixing it or even getting out to figure out what was going on, they just stayed in the car, sitting there and waiting, like the problem might eventually solve itself if nobody touched it long enough.
Uh-oh. Get straight. Oh, well, I guess this isn't the ad for Tahoes that I originally thought it was. This could get bad fast.
The car is overheating. Now what do we do? This is not good.
I don't know what to do.
The car is not going anywhere, and we won't last here long without air conditioning.
Because they got a hell of a lot of Mountain Dew. Why does he have a lady pooping out an avocado on his arm?
Lee and me are stuck on the side of the road right now, and we're not really sure what's wrong with the car, but Lee thinks it might be overheated. And it's so humiliating because we are both too big to even get out of the car to figure it out.
After a while, Lee called his sister for help, and she actually came through, driving all the way out just to bring them water and get the car sorted enough to keep going.
Thank you so much for coming and helping us. Dump one in and then I'll start it and let it suck it up and we'll put the other one.
And the question that keeps sitting is, what happens when there's no sister to call, no one to show up, or no backup plan parked somewhere nearby? What happens when it's just them, stuck, with no one else in the picture to absorb the problem? And that question doesn't really leave your head, because every problem so far has a hidden safety net underneath it. Someone else always stepped in and fixed it. Take that away and the whole system stops feeling sustainable. Now let's look at another moment that hits a different kind of disturbing, and truly looked like Lee and Rena were never really going to make it out at this point. The road trip to Houston, which started, with snacks as expected.
I am so afraid that I am not going to live long enough to marry the woman that I love, and that I no longer even have a future unless someone can save me from myself.
Saying that while he's biting into a burger loaded with melted cheese feels almost unreal, like the words and the action are happening in completely different worlds.
I hate when everybody stares at you just sitting here eating.
Yeah.
They're not
When
used
they're
to
driving by.
It's like they've never seen a fat guy shove a hamburger in his face.
About a few hours into the highway, something happened that ended up sticking more than anything else on that drive.
Think you can stick that urinal down my britches and help me pee?
I can try.
Lee needed to use the bathroom. Seeing his size, you already knew this situation had limits before anything even started. Stopping wasn't realistic. Getting him out of the car wasn't realistic. Finding a proper place in time wasn't happening either. So the options shrink down to almost nothing. And what's left is Rena at 542 pounds herself in her own discomfort, holding a urinal for him while he probably lifted his ding-dong to find his member to pee.
With Lee, he has to be laid down, and someone else has to hold the urinal for him in place just for him to be able to pee. That person, 9 times out of 10, is me, and when I do it, I have to stand to do it. So therefore, it exerts me also.
Meanwhile, Lee's friend had quietly excused himself, like he had reached the exact limit of what he was willing to witness in real time. They finally made it to Houston, and Dr. Now put them on the scale. Lee came in at 714 pounds, Rena at 549. He looked at those numbers the same way he always does, that confirm exactly what he had already suspected. And then he delivered the medical reality in the particular tone he reserves for situations where softening it would be a form of negligence.
So let's take a look at your medical history and your current situation. All right, Lee, you are 714 pounds, and Renee, you are 549 pounds. And you both have significant health issues as a result of your weight. Renee, you're diabetic and you take an enormous amount of insulin.
Yes.
For Lee, high blood pressure, sleep apnea, gout, acid reflux, high cholesterol, depression, oxygen dependency. At this point, you can't even call it. It's more like a status report on a system that had been running past its limit for a long time. Dr. Now told Lee clearly and without decoration that there was no way his body was going to be able to sustain his weight for much longer at all. Lee received this information, and for someone who looked like he couldn't function without food, the expectation was that nothing would really change. But over the following months, something unexpected did happen. He actually lost some weight. Not a dramatic transformation, but enough to register as real movement. Rena also mentioned her concern about Lee's temper when he couldn't get what he wanted during cravings, saying it could become difficult to manage in those moments. Now that's a rich attitude coming from someone who went to visit Dr. Now.
Part has been cutting back our diet.
My biggest fear was when Lee gets cravings and he doesn't get what he wants. He can get very angry.
Rena lost some pounds too, and a body that was itself already in crisis, all while still managing Lee's daily existence. And even with that small progress from both of them, it still wasn't enough to meet the weight Dr. Now had set for surgery. So they kept going back to the hospital, appointment after appointment. Eventually, after a few rounds of check-ins and continued monitoring, Lee finally got approved for gastric bypass surgery.
But it's a chance I'm willing to take. Because if I don't do this, I could fall back and eat myself to death. So I'm risking my life to have a better life.
Lee came back to Dr. Now's office having lost 9 pounds. After a while and with a gastric bypass already completed, that's where things got heated with Dr. Now. He simply could not believe that Lee had lost only 9 pounds. Meanwhile, Rena had lost more weight, around 50 pounds, without any procedure involved. So from Dr. Now's perspective, this made absolutely no sense. Because if someone gets a gastric bypass and comes back with 9 pounds lost, while the person beside them is dropping more weight without one, the first thing you're going to assume is that somebody's not being entirely honest about what they've been doing.
How y'all doing?
Surviving.
Surviving, huh? So is that why you missed your last appointment? Okay. You just had your bypass about 2 months ago, and when you left the hospital, you were down to 546. So you lost only 9 pounds since then. But Renee has lost almost 50 pounds at the same time, and she hasn't even had her bypass yet. What in the world is going on with you?
I guess I'm eating the wrong things.
You think it's funny? You have a gastric bypass.
I had a gastric bypass,
to
yes.
lose weight,
To lose weight.
and you're not losing weight.
Dr. Now has a very specific look for the moment a patient's story and a patient's scales stop telling the same story. The questions get shorter, his patience gets thinner. But what followed in this episode was one of the more ridiculous exchanges the show ever produced.
I don't eat a third what I ate
just
before I
answer
had
the
that
question,
surgery.
okay? Then
You're
we're not
asking
talking
me
about
questions that I don't understand no more than you understand.
Here was Lee sitting across from the man who had just performed his surgery, having lost 9 pounds in 2 months, trying to explain where the weight loss had gone, saying stuff like maybe he wasn't eating the right things, maybe he was retaining fluid, maybe he couldn't pee properly, and you could almost see Dr. Now mentally crossing each excuse off the list as it arrived, because at 714 pounds after surgery, after all the appointments, 9 pounds wasn't the kind of number that inspired a deep medical mystery. It inspired suspicion. That was when Dr. Now asked Lee a question that could make you hear a pin drop, right after Lee had said something truly ridiculous.
I don't want to get malnourished either.
Do you look like you're malnourished?
And then because 9 pounds and fluid retention, I can't hardly pee had not been sufficient to resolve the consultation, Lee decided the appropriate next move was to end it himself.
I'm done with this conversation. Go to her.
No, we're gonna finish with you.
No, we're not finishing with me. You're making me mad.
Yeah,
I'm
sit
leaving.
down right there.
Tried to leave Dr. Now's office mid-appointment, while Dr. Now was telling him to sit back down. Even Rena stepped in, pulling him back into the seat, but Lee was too stubborn. He got up and walked out anyway. Dr. Now, who had clearly run out of patience at that point, didn't follow. He just let the door close behind him, then turned back to Rena and continued the conversation as if the interruption had been noted and dismissed.
Renee, you stayed on track, despite how Lee is behaving, and I'm proud of you for that.
From a man who does not give praise easily, that statement carried weight. After that, he told her something harder to accept. Her surgery, which she had already qualified for, was being put on hold because of Lee's behavior. Because the environment Lee was creating was one nobody could succeed in long term. And without support at home, the surgery would be setting her up to fail.
So you should be ready for weight loss surgery. However, Lee is creating an environment that you can't succeed in long term. No one can do this without support. No one. Surgery now without addressing what's going on with Lee and will be setting you up for failure. So I'm going to send you both to therapy, and I want you to convince Lee to go. If he's...
Here's the thing about Lee losing weight. It should have been part of this story where things got better, where he found his footing and looked back at everything Rena had given and felt something enormous about it.
Now that you had the surgery, the physical drive to eat is gone.
But that's not what happened. What happened instead was that Lee found his footing, looked back at 11 years of Rena's care, and paid back with, should we call it evil? Here's the thing. Rena somehow convinced Lee to go for therapy, just like Dr. Now had ordered. They both showed up. It was in that office where uncomfortable truths started coming out.
I don't know what kind of person she wants me to be.
I want you to communicate with me.
I will conversate with you.
I want you to...
If you don't turn around and tell me I'm not paying attention.
From this clip, you'll find out that Lee is someone with annoying behavior. Walking out on Dr. Now was pretty evident, but here in this office, constantly cutting Rena off while she's speaking is another big indicator that Lee might just be a real pain in the ass.
Okay, but...
This is why we can't communicate, because he either overtalks me, interrupts me, or won't let me finish.
But this was not just emotional, it was physical. And what I mean is domestic abuse was part of it.
Physically?
Physically violent,
And he has never been like that.
There's only been a couple instances. It ain't like I every day, but...
And right here, things were very disturbing, because the level of detail at which Lee described how he laid his hands on Rena was way too uncomfortable, almost like he mapped out exactly how he was going to do it.
Anything like that.
Unfortunately, Lee.
She ran at me with her fist up. I grabbed her by her hands and I kicked her because she was gonna hit me.
I was holding his hand.
Now that sounds like someone who would do much worse if he wasn't carrying a lot of body weight.
Unfortunately, physical abuse is always wrong.
I know this, but it ain't like I doubled my fist and knocked the piss out of her.
Dr. Now, who had watched all of this unfold across multiple appointments and who does not reach for dramatic language casually, described what he was seeing between them as something he was very concerned about. Because that's what the show does. It captures things that are genuinely disturbing and then packages them inside the conventions of reality TV in a way that processes the weight out of what you're actually watching. A man becoming physically violent with the woman who kept him alive for 11 years got the dramatic music treatment. What it was without the music was abuse. Now, the part which probably is the highlight of this entire story, despite everything Rena had done for Lee, he still found some time within his weight loss journey to cheat. Now, it's not like he popped out on social media with this new woman or something. Thing is, Rena posted really weird on Facebook, which reads, "Wow, once a cheater, always a cheater. Guess one day I will learn. Good riddance to excess baggage. Maybe I can finally be me now." And right after she did that and sparked internet speculations, she deleted it. But I looked through her page and there are still posts on there that feel like subtle shots at her ex-lover. The truth behind all of this we'll most likely never find out, because as it stands, it looks like everyone is genuinely moved on. Now let's roll things back to when these two simply didn't know each other, because neither of them arrived at 600 pounds through a simple failure of willpower, and the show, to its credit, took the time to show that. The truth is, Rena had a very pathetic childhood. She grew up with a mother whose relationship with reality was, at best, very unreliable. Psychotic episodes were not occasional disruptions in the Kiser household. They were part of the architecture of daily life. By the time Rena was 15 years old, her mother had essentially stopped functioning as a parent in any meaningful sense, and Rena was left standing in the wreckage of all that with no real roadmap for what came next.
As long as I can remember, I have struggled with being overweight, and
I did eat for comfort, but it built over the years because of how hard my childhood was.
What food does in that kind of environment is it becomes the one thing that's always available and always consistent. People leave, stability disappears, but food is there. Food delivers something reliable in a life where reliability is otherwise in very short supply.
When my mom was hallucinating, it scared me.
so food was a way to deal with the stress.
By her teenage years, Rena was already 300 pounds, and her brother, who grew up in the same house under the same conditions, was also 600 pounds by the time he was an adult. I'll have you understand that this detail is not incidental. It just tells you something about what that household produced, not as an excuse for either of them, but as an honest accounting of the conditions that shaped them.
He was using food to cope all these years too, and was over 600 pounds.
Seeing how bad things had gotten for her, Rena decided to check herself into a weight loss clinic. And unfortunately, or maybe quite fortunately, that's where she met Lee.
He was a sweet guy, and we started spending a lot of time together.
Well, Lee Sutton's road to 714 pounds had a different texture, but underneath it sat the same basic pattern. His story didn't begin with food, but with things happening in his childhood that no child should have to deal with. As a kid, Lee was countlessly by his step-sibling. For Lee, food slowly became the escape hatch, so he ate, because eating genuinely made him feel better for a little while. His family eventually noticed that something wasn't right. They saw the amount of food disappearing. They saw the growing fixation, and their solution was a padlock on the refrigerator. Food was hidden. Access was controlled. Family members decided what he could eat and when he could eat it. Now that sounds like the kind of plan that makes sense for about 5 seconds. Food had stopped being food a long time ago. Lee's coping mechanism slowly became a routine, then a habit, then the thing he reached for whenever life became difficult. By the time Lee was 10 years old, he already weighed around 200 pounds. At 18, that number had climbed to 500. After that, the direction of the story was almost set. The scale kept moving upward because nothing underneath it had really changed. Year after year, it kept building until it eventually carried him all the way to 714 pounds. 714 pounds means life stops being simple in the most basic way. Getting out of bed becomes a process instead of a routine. The same goes for walking to the bathroom, getting dressed, reaching the front door. Each one turns into something negotiated with the body instead of done automatically. Lee needed help with essentially everything, and the person who provided that help consistently, completely for 11 years was Rena, who was, it's worth repeating, 542 pounds herself and in her own medical crisis while she was doing it. And that context matters, because it's easy to look at the arguments, the cheating accusations, the fights, the manipulation, and all the chaos that happened later and forget what the foundation of this relationship actually looked like. Before that, there were two people whose lives had become completely consumed by food, dependency, and survival. Now that we've gone back and looked at how they got there, it's worth looking at what happened after. Fortunately, Rena lost 288 pounds.
To make it below 250.
She went from 542 pounds to 254. That's a loss of 288 pounds. At this point, she was sitting within reach of her goal weight of 250, which is probably not where most people expected this story to end when they first saw her. And unlike a lot of people who leave the show and slowly drift back toward where they started, Rena mostly stayed there. The photos she posted in the years afterward tell that story pretty clearly. The weight stayed off, which is important to mention, because losing weight on my 600-pound life is one thing. Keeping it off after the cameras disappear, after Dr. Now stops calling, and after nobody is checking in anymore, that's usually the harder part. Rena managed to do both. She now posts about being a strong woman. She spends time with her family, posting more of them. Here's the last photo of herself that she posted. When you look at it, you just see how happy she looks after losing a lot of her weight, compared to the time she could barely breathe after taking a step. And when you step back from Rena's side of the story, Lee's path doesn't disappear, it just looks different, because after everything, Lee still kept moving forward in his own way. Lee dropped 303 pounds. Now, it's not a small change in any version of this story. He also went through skin removal surgery. His last publicly reported weight sits around 411 pounds, which tells you two things at the same time. There's still work left to do, and there's also been real distance created from where he started at 714, and that's where we pick him up next. After the separation from Rena, Lee went back to Missouri, and the weight started creeping back up. Around 80 pounds by some accounts returned over time. Alongside that came reports of nights out, trips to bars, and a general direction that didn't look much like maintenance or recovery. Even Dr. Now, during a later video call, described the situation in unusually blunt terms. And for a doctor who spends his career dealing with life or death cases and tends to choose his words carefully, that kind of language stands out. It's not something he reaches for lightly.
Following the diet and you're not able to control your eating habit, is that what you're telling me?
It's hard to control a habit.
Well, we also gave you psychotherapy to help you, but you stopped going to that too. So if you're telling me now you want to start again, why don't we set you up to see a therapist over there and a dietitian?
That would be great.
The numbers on that call weren't good, and when you place them back into the full timeline of Lee and Rena's relationship, they revealed something the show format had mostly hidden while it was unfolding. Lee's progress during the time Rena was present didn't exist in isolation. It happened inside a system Rena was actively holding together. The structure around meals, the day-to-day care, the constant management of situations that on their own would have been difficult for one person to maintain, let alone two people both dealing with severe obesity and health crises. And while she was in that same struggle, she was the one stabilizing the conditions around his recovery. When that support disappeared, what followed made one thing a lot clearer in hindsight. Some of what looked like individual progress was also environmental.
Your health, you're the one responsible for changing your eating habit. You're responsible to follow up with your doctor and see a therapist and get the help that you need.
Without her, the structure dissolved. The weight started coming back. The bar visits began showing up in the timeline. The video call with Dr. Now became necessary again. And in hindsight, it wasn't complicated to explain. Lee had spent 11 years being looked after at a level that covered almost every part of daily functioning. Meals, routines, stability, decision-making, all of it was supported directly or indirectly by Rena's presence. When that stopped, there was no separate system underneath it waiting to take over, because he hadn't built one. So once the external structure disappeared, there was nothing internal strong enough to replace it, and the rest followed the only way it really could. They separated in 2019. The cheating accusation was the stated reason. They reportedly did get back together briefly after that, which in hindsight fits a pattern that was already well established. A pause more than a reset, but then it eventually ended for good. Rena moved on with her life and relationships, and the last thing we've seen about Lee is that he sadly passed away in January 2026. R.I.P. to him. Still, the contrast between where they ended up is not subtle. Rena held on to the change. The weight stayed off, and what she built during that time didn't disappear once everything around it changed. It carried forward into the years after the show, into a life that looks steady in a way that wasn't always the case before. Lee's path didn't hold the same way. After the separation, the structure that had been doing a lot of unseen work in the background was gone.
We fought about it constantly. Cussing each other, calling each other names. Then a few times it got violent. Each other.
And your health is going to go down really rapidly. So I'm going to set up doing an endoscopy on you tomorrow.
Park here in Houston. I've been trying to do all the walking I need outside so I can enjoy the scenery and the fresh air. And it feels good because I can go twice as long as I could when I started a month ago.